All right, so now we're going to get a little bit into what TensorFlow actually is, what it does, what purposes it has, and how you can actually start setting up your system in order to run this crazy, complicated software. So to begin, TensorFlow is essentially a set of libraries that covers machine learning. It takes all of that crazy hard stuff, like building a whole system, building a model, writing the algorithms, what have you, and puts it all into these small, easy packages that you can import and run and use all of their predefined technologies to define, create a tensor, build these arrays, and then load into their system and run these models and model your data, essentially. It was first developed by Google, and I believe it is still being used for all of their internal neural networks as well. As far as setting it up, there are a few places you got to start with. Firstly, you got to choose what kind of TensorFlow you want. Luckily, Google has been kind enough to develop a few different platforms that you can run it on. There's TensorFlow Core, which is the one that I'll be using mainly. This one is built in Python, essentially. Python's really popular for a lot of machine learning models because Python as a language is really easy to get into. It already relies a lot on that kind of import and run style coding anyway, so TensorFlow lines up really well with that. Not only that, there's a lot of scientists who have interest in machine learning, who want to do experiments, what have you. And however, programming can be kind of a hard subject to get into for a lot of people. And not everybody has time to go get a degree in computer science just to do their regular day job. So Python's a really good compromise there where it's easy to get started, easy to follow some guides, get TensorFlow set up, get it going, and you're good to go most of the time. On the other hand, TensorFlow is also designed for JavaScript, super popular these days, using Node specifically. Then you got some mobile and Internet of Things devices as well. That way you can use it on your phones or what have you. I'm not personally a fan of that. I like building on a computer, but that's just me personally. And then you got the production version, which is a lot more in depth and something we won't be covering in these videos. So as far as talking about what kind of environment you want to actually run your TensorFlow in, you have a lot of different options. So I'll be talking about what I started by doing and what I was going through, and then moving on into what I eventually settled on for doing all my TensorFlow work. So to begin with, you got to set up your Python, which is always nice and fun. So you have a few different options. I started by just downloading it, running it, importing it, using the base Windows. I should mention I am on a Windows system. I do all of my development at the moment on Windows, but I do have experience with Linux, Mac, etc., primarily through Ubuntu, but that's a different conversation. Right now, all the coding, all the development for these blog posts are going to be done on Windows. So you would just do your downloads, your installations, import Python, and then everybody knows our lovely little pip3 to import and install TensorFlow. Alternatively, you could create a Python virtual environment. That was something that I definitely considered doing, and I did play around with for a little while, but I ended up giving up for a different reason later. Lastly, you can use an IDE. PyCharm is the one I usually use when I'm doing my Python development. I definitely recommend it. This one's really nice because it has that GUI in front, so you don't have to worry about the installations as much. You can just click the button and run it. Makes it a lot easier on everybody's lives, honestly. So that's also a really good option. It's the one I generally prefer for Python development. However, now I'm going to get a little bit into why I didn't end up going any of these routes. Essentially, since I'm on a Windows machine, specifically one that has the Intel display adapters, it's not capable of optimizing for TensorFlow. You actually need the CUDA toolkit, not exactly sure how to pronounce that, along with the NVIDIA drivers in order to properly optimize your GPU for TensorFlow. As a result, I was having a lot of troubles, like it wasn't running that fast, it wasn't running that well, it just wasn't very optimized. So I ended up going with something super useful called Google Collaboratory. It's essentially another Google platform, Google, that allows you to develop and execute Python code inside your browser. Over here, you can connect to Google's servers, right? You'll get access to their stuff. You can see you got your RAM and disk space and what have you. And you can write code right in here. So for example, if I wanted to import TensorFlow, because we're starting a project, you just click it, run it, and that is now part of your script or what have you. Because normally with Python, when you run things, you go to Python first and yada, 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 and then you can type in your parts here, for example, and I'm getting these errors due to the unoptimization of my GPU, as you can see with this lovely message right here. And as you can also see, I'm having a very, very long load time on this, while here it just took a second or so. And that can be really useful, especially when you have a device that's not as essentially strong, that doesn't have as good a processor, because this way you can offload it to the free resources that are at your disposal. Not only that, this allows you to make sure that everybody working on a project all have the exact same resources and materials, right? You don't have to worry about people running different versions of things because you can check it in the code. It's all on the same server. Everybody should have the same version. That way you don't really have to worry about that whole, it's working on my machine, but that's not the option here. And then you can pop in other code blocks, and then you can reorganize them however you wish, right? And then they run in the order you click them as well. So I would keep that in mind. So as you can see, that was the first one ran, that was the second one. If we pop in another one right here, and you can see the numbers popping up, right? That's essentially how it works.